Hello, I'm Gunjan Handa, and this is On Record with TAC. Today, we confront one of the most urgent human rights crises of our time. China's systematic oppression of Uyghurs and other Turkic people in East Turkestan, or Xinjiang as we know it today. From mass detentions and forced assimilation to allegations of genocide and organ harvesting, the world has witnessed alarming evidence of Beijing's campaign to erase Uyghur identity. Yet, amid this repression, a government in exile, democratically elected by the diaspora, has emerged as a defiant voice of independence and justice. With us today is our guest, Salih Hudayar. He is the Foreign Minister of the East Turkistan Government in Exile, or ETGE as we will be referring to it, and a leading advocate for Uyghur self-determination. Born in Xinjiang and now a US citizen, Hudayar's journey to become an exiled diplomat underscores his commitment to this cause. First as Prime Minister from 2019 to 2023, and now as the Foreign Minister, he has spearheaded efforts to expose China's atrocities, from releasing coordinates of internment camps to filling genocide charges at the International Criminal Court. With his work, he challenges both China's version of it all and the silence among other nations that shadow the fight. Hi, sir. How are you this evening?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm great too. I do understand that where you are sitting, it does not look like a happy world. And unfortunately, it is not. I would, however, like to begin with commending the bravery of Uyghurs and the government in exile that they have been showing against a giant as big as China. I would like you to reflect a little bit on your personal journey with this and how you came to be such a huge part of this.
Yes, I was forced to flee into exile in my home country back in 2000. So it's been about 25 years. This June, it'll be 25 years since I was forced into exile. Even in the 90s, late 90s, this is when China began to intensify its campaign of colonization and forced assimilation, and really lay down the groundworks for the ongoing genocidal campaign that we see today. So in 1996 of March, the Chinese government, Communist Party, Politburo, issued a top secret document known as Document Number 7, which is a series of 10 series directive to essentially both crush our independence movement, but also to prevent the internationalization of our cause, and to lay down the groundworks for the genocide that we are seeing today. So post 1996, tens of thousands of our people were arrested. Our culture, our religious practices, our movement was severely beginning to become restricted. And so my father, he had fled East Turkestan back in 1995. And then later he was in Central Asia, and then he resettled in the United States in 1998. And after 2 years, we were able to reunite with him as political refugees. And growing up here in the United States, I mean, I have to say, I have to thank my father for my upbringing, because from day one of arriving in the United States, he always educated us that our duty was to, become educated here, so we could, be more empowered to one day return to help free our nation. By 2016, members of our own family, extended family in East Turkestan, they were being rounded up and put into concentration camps and prisons. By 2017, over 100 members of my extended family were taken, and thus we began to, we had no other choice, because if we remain silent, then we're through our silence, we're going to be complicit in the murder of our own family, of our own people. So I spearheaded along with other young Uyghurs and Kazakhs from East Turkestan, we founded the East Turkestan National Movement to advocate for East Turkestan's independence and to call for an end to the ongoing genocide. Then this revitalized our global diaspora, especially the youth, to where we became more active and outspoken. And then by 2019, I had gained prominence in leading our diaspora, especially the youth, and this poised me to become an upcoming leader within our diaspora and our government in exile. People urged me to run for elections in the 2019 government in exile elections, and I became a member of our parliament in exile, and I was elected as the prime minister briefly, despite my young age, despite I didn't want to be a prime minister, but it was from the pressure of our people. And then now I serve since 2023 as the Minister for Foreign Affairs and Security of the government in exile. Alongside, I still continue to lead the East Turkistan national movement.
So before I move on to my other questions, I want to ask this, that with all the concentration camps that videos and footages have come out of China for, and people have claimed that, and some of those claims are also supported by evidence, that a lot of Uyghurs and other minority communities have been taken to these detention camps, never to be seen again. I want to understand, what does this detention camp comprise of? And could you maybe, however unfortunate this is, I don't think there is enough information about this out there. So I want to learn more about, and I want my audience also to know more about what these detention camps are, and why are these set up, and how are these operated for that matter, and what all atrocities have been documented out of this.
Yes, the Chinese government officially describes these concentration camps as so-called vocational training centers or re-education camps. They started laying the groundworks for this in 2013. The Chinese government, if you look at leaked Chinese government documents, they were starting building this. And even if you look at Google Earth and you look at the site of these concentration camps, because you can see the progress over, in 2012, they were empty fields. And then 2013, you see it being transformed. By 2014 and 2015, it's fully operational concentration camps.
Are these concentrations, I'm sorry for cutting you out here, but are these concentrations anywhere close to or similar to what the Nazi Germany had in 1930s and 40s?
Absolutely. They're large compounds with high walls, barbed wires. They look like, prisons, but they're still a little bit distinguishable. There's several walls within layers. Barbed wires, high police guard towers, and people who disappear into these camps are not usually they're not seen again. That's the unfortunate thing. From my own relatives, what I can confirm, what have been able to confirm, is 4 have been killed in these camps and the prisons. Others, we haven't been able to get any information, especially even after we filed our ICC case in July of 2020. Even my relatives, extended relatives that I was able to get some information from, that were in neighboring Central Asia, even they cut off contact because of fear. So I've been essentially ostracized by my own relatives as well, not because of the fear of the environment, and because even the Central Asian countries like Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, they are members of the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which was specifically set up post document number 7 initially as the Shanghai 5 in 1996, to help China crush our independence movement and to prevent any advocacy within Central Asia or any of those countries. Of course, in these camps, what you have seen, if you look at the photos, the videos, and you can easily find them on Google and YouTube. People are being, put into these camps where they are subject to torture, indoctrination, forced medication, and even the Chinese government documents confirm this. Um, they're forced to learn Chinese. They're forcibly medicated. Before people were thrown into these camps, the Chinese government collected the DNA samples, the voice prints, and retina scans of everyone in these camps and outside those camps as well. Because if you look at Xinhua's 2000, which is Chinese state media, in 2018, they stated that China collected the DNA samples and voice prints and retina scans of 36 million people between the ages of 12 and 65 in East Turkestan alone. So this shows you the scale. The U.S. Department of Defense in May 2019, in its report stated that China was holding at least 3 million Uyghurs and other Turkic peoples in these concentration camps. China's own white paper in 2020, initially China denied it. Then in 2000, by 2020, everything became very clear because there was satellite imagery of this, leaked documents. China put out a white paper defending these concentration camps as so-called vocational training camps, and it stated that every year between 2014 and 2019, they sent 1.29 million people per year to receive so-called vocational training. Um, and that's roughly 7.8 million people over the course of 7-8 years. Uh, so it's a large number of people being put into these camps. Women, both men and women, are facing uh, rape and other sexual violence. And on top of that, just last year, there was a congressional hearing in the United States Congress where experts on organ harvesting, like Ethan Gutman, testified based on Chinese government's own data and testimony from surviving witnesses and other medical records, hospital records. They estimated that at minimum, since 2014, 25,000 to 50,000 Uyghurs between the ages of 18 to 30 are being killed annually solely for their organs. And he stated very clearly that by the new year, by 2025, it would be safe to say that anywhere from 250,000 to 500,000 Uyghurs have been brutally killed solely for their organs alone. On top of that, our people are being killed through disease, in these concentration camps. Many of the people that are dying in these concentration camps, China is saying they died from tuberculosis.
Right.
Others are being executed. Like, for example, in terms of my one of the relatives, he was executed. Not only after they killed him, they went on to further humiliate our relatives there, his remaining family, and made them sing and dance. They sent officials to sing and dance, praising the Communist Party for killing him. And they took a video of that. And this is the type of things, like, for example, if you are executed, the government makes you pay the family, pay the bill for those bullets that they use to kill you. So this is a type of monstrosity that humanity has not seen. Nowhere in any part of the world do they do this type of humiliation on top of the murder that they committed.
Merely listening to any and all of this is sending chills down my body, and I have goosebumps even thinking about any of these things, let alone knowing that some of these things are happening to your own family. First of all, I would like to offer my condolences for any and all family members that you have lost, and I hope the fight ends sooner than later. I then want to go on and ask a question that despite so much documentation of all these atrocities, be it forced sterilizations, the rape, the murders, any and all of these things, and the total cultural erasure in Xinjiang region, how has your government been responding to China's constant denial of this genocide? Because China has continued to deny any and all of this. China does not agree that any of this is happening under their roof, or any such concentration camps for that matter have been set up. However, there have been overwhelming documentation of all these things. There have been overwhelming evidence of this. So I, one, want to understand that how is your government reacting to the denial of genocide? And secondly, what are the actionable evidence that ETGE has provided the international bodies with?
Yes. So, and as far as pushing back against China's denial, I mean, we are using leaked Chinese government documents, their own statements. We're using satellite imagery, um, some video footage, photographs, journalistic reports that are out there, publicly available to push back. It's undeniable. Most importantly, as part of our filings, I mean, everything that China is doing in East Turkestan is defined as genocide under the UN definition of genocide, under the UN Genocide Convention. They're
Right.
sterilizing our women. At least 300,000 of our women have been sterilized. They're they've killed over 3.7 million babies, and this is not for us stating this. This is the Chinese state media stating this. That between 1989 and 2009, that they prevented so-called 3.7 million illegal births amongst so-called minority populations in occupied East Turkestan. This
So
is the
that
Chinese.
means forced abortions. Does that mean forced abortions?
Yes, absolutely. That means forced abortions, because if they're saying that they're preventing illegal births, that means they're preventing our women from delivering their babies. Um, this is the Chinese government's own words. Like, even, for example, we would have never known that they collected the DNA samples, voice prints, and retina scans of 36 million people if they had not admitted to it. We would have not known that they were, shaving our people's heads and transferring them like, cattle onto cattle trains, if there had not been able, if there had not, if those leaked videos had not emerged. um, these are all things, we would have not known that their goal is to, kill us like, weeds, and root us out, and and show absolutely no mercy, to erase our origins, if those documents from, secret speeches from Xi Jinping to senior government officials had not, been leaked. I mean,
So, even though there cannot be any possible explanation for any of this, or any possible um, justification for any of these atrocities, China has been dismissing the Uyghur persecution as anti-terrorism acts that they've been carrying out. So, how have you or your government in exile been countering this narrative on a global level? Because they have been dismissing this as countering terrorism in their own area. So, what is, if at all there is any, what is the reason behind this forced cleansing, forced ethical cleansing in the region?
well, it's very simple. It's rooted in Chinese colonization and occupation of East Turkestan. China's goal from day one was to eradicate our people. I mean, back in 1949, when China invaded and occupied East Turkestan, one of the generals that they sent to lead this occupation was Wang Zhen. During the first 4 years of Chinese occupation, from 1950 till 1954, the Chinese government itself stated at that time that they killed 150,000 so-called enemies of the people. And Wang Jin, who was the Chinese general, he wrote to Mao stating that the Uyghurs were a troublemaking people, and that they needed to be thoroughly wiped out. But because Uyghurs were the overwhelming majority at that time, and the situation, China did not have the capacity to just commit genocide, and didn't have the resources at that time, Mao wrote back and said, "Wait, but the time for it will come. Wait." The Chinese, they've never stopped. They've never stopped in their agenda. They just waited until they were more powerful, to where the international community would not be as as critical of them, to where they would be able to get this. And of course, they fabricated the so-called counter-terrorism narrative. um, you know the language that China used to describe us. So we went from so-called counter revolutionaries and ethnic nationalists in the 1950s, all the way up until really 1998, 1999, when the proliferation of Islamic fundamentalism across the globe, when that became more, an attractive, or more common, and this fear, China exploited that, because majority of our people are, ethnically, religiously, or Muslim. So China exploited the fact that there was rising Islamic fundamentalism in other parts of the world, and that this was the perfect opportunity for China to exploit, to get the international community to turn a blind eye. And that, unfortunately, the international community did turn a blind eye, especially post 2001. Many governments engaged in so-called anti-terrorism cooperation with China, taking China's statements and accusations, false allegations at face value, without scrutinizing any of the reality. For example, our people, millions of those people, are women, children. We have over 1 million children, that are in essentially concentration camps as well. But the Chinese government claims that they are so-called orphanages and boarding schools. And if you see those videos, our children are being trained by the People's Liberation Army, forced into little military uniforms, just like how ISIS, forces little kids into making those videos, indoctrinating them. China is doing
Right.
the same,
Right.
and teaching them to become future soldiers of the People's Liberation Army, to fight against so-called Western imperialism, and to reject our own identity, our culture, all these things. China, what it's doing is state terrorism and genocide under the guise of so-called counterterrorism.
So,
There,
yes, please finish your sentence.
our people, we have resisted against an occupation. We have the right under international law to resist against a foreign invader and occupier. Our people have not used, we haven't engaged in explicit, terrorist acts, because, of course, that's something that is inhumane. And, of course, that's not something that aligns with the values and principles of not just our movement, but with international law, and even with our religion. Our religion commands us, to fight those who fight against us. Not Our religion prohibits us from targeting women and children. It prohibits us from targeting the elderly. All these things, and of course,
Right.
we don't do that. But the Chinese government, it's engaging on state terrorism on all levels. Everyone from our babies that are still in the womb are being killed, to everyone that's, our children are being brainwashed, our women. And many of the all of these people are unarmed. We have not been able to have an armed resistance in East Turkestan really since the early 1990s.
So this brings me to my next question that I wanted to ask, and I'm glad you brought up the word occupation. China has been sending its or resettling its Han Chinese, which are the locals, which are the demographic locals of China, into these occupied areas, be it Tibet, be it Xinjiang for that matter. And we will refer to Xinjiang particularly in this case, that they have been relocating these Han Chinese to Xinjiang region to also occupy it, almost mirroring what Israel has been doing. So I want to understand that one, how dangerous is the demographic change in that region? And second, the second layer of this question that I want to ask is that because they are being moved, Han Chinese are being moved into the Xinjiang territory, that also means that people living there, which is your native demographic, they have been directly affected by all of this. So What has your government essentially been doing to protect people that are in China at this moment?
Well, I mean, firstly, I want to explain that the term Xinjiang, it means the colony or new territory in Chinese. So it's deeply offensive for us because we are not a new colony, nor are we a new territory of China. Historically, we've been known as Turkestan or East Turkestan, especially since the 18th century. So I just want to clarify that. Secondly, when it comes to Chinese colonization of East Turkestan and the demographic changes that have appeared. So in 1949, 1950, shortly after the Chinese took over and occupied East Turkestan, Mao stated at that time there were 9 million Turkic peoples in East Turkestan. Uyghurs, Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, and other Turkic peoples combined, we made up about 95% of the population. Um, the Chinese, they made up less than 2%. And that 2% was the Chinese soldiers, the 200,000 Chinese soldiers that had, and administrators that had been sent there to, along with their families that had been sent there to occupy and colonize East Turkestan. Uh, by the start of the ongoing genocide in 2014, the demographics shifted drastically to where the Uyghur and other Turkic population, we numbered about 58 to 59% of the population of East Turkestan. But again, this is according to the Chinese government's own statistics or claims. And they like to downplay our numbers a lot. Whereas the Chinese colonist population, it grew from less than 2% in 1950 after the occupation to roughly about 35 to 40% today. So there's a huge demographic shift, especially in the north. The northern parts of East Turkestan, the Chinese have dominated more. The south, uh, it's mostly a desert oasis. We've been able to still retain, to a large extent, our majority, but the north has drastically shifted. For example, take the capital of the de facto or the capital today, Urumqi. Um, Urumqi is predominantly Chinese. The Uyghur and other Turkic populations in Urumqi make up maybe 15 to 20%, whereas the Chinese are over 70 to 80% of the population. In other parts of in other northern cities in East Turkestan, the demographics are becoming equally almost similar to where China wants to erase, or extremely minimize our population. And of course, we are pushing back to this as best as we can. Right now, we are trying to seek, as we stated, to protect our population, to one, raise awareness, but to seek international justice and accountability. We're trying to push for decolonization, just how other nations have the right to self-determination. We have a right to self-determination too. Unlike other nations, like for example, in the case of the Palestinians, their cause is very well known. The United Nations and a lot of countries, support their right to self-determination and their independence. But unlike Palestine, we were an independent state in 1949. When the UN was set up, we were an independent state known as the East Turkestan Republic. Our people declared independence twice in the 20th century as the East Turkestan Republic. We fit all the categories of statehood under the 1933 Montevideo Convention. We were a state, whether the international governments acknowledge that or not. We were an independent state, and that's something that many people ignore. We have, I don't want to say this, but we have much more right to national self-determination and the restoration of independence than other causes from a legalist perspective, because we have that legal basis. We're not calling for the creation of a new state. What we are calling for is the restoration of our independence and into foreign Chinese occupation of our homeland. And for us, that's the only way. Independence is the only way to ensure our people's human rights, to ensure our people's very survival. Because right now, genocide is not going to, no government is going to come
Right,
and stop this genocide for us. We've seen
right,
the international community. No government is going to guarantee our human rights. No government was even willing to save Uyghurs outside of East Turkestan, let alone those inside East Turkestan.
right.
And to think that the Chinese government, which doesn't give human rights to its own people, will give human rights to us is just, foolish and childish. So for us, there's only one way, and that's independence.
Right. Talking about the human right violations that Uyghurs have been facing, not just in China, but even outside China, which you just mentioned, I want to understand that a lot of people have been forced to flee Xinjiang region and to find refuge in other nations. What do you think is the biggest lull, or what does the host nations, what do the host nations for that matter lack in terms of providing support for any and all of these refugees that are fleeing for security concerns or persecution concerns from Xinjiang region?
So for our people who flee occupied East Turkestan, many flee often into neighboring countries. So like Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, um, historically even Pakistan, India, some into Mongolia. Many of these countries, especially post 1996, China has developed very deep political and economic and security ties with these countries. So in exchange for Chinese investments, political and whatnot support, those countries often, listen to the Chinese. They sell us like we're, commodities to the Chinese. In cases like Pakistan, for example, in many instances, the Pakistanis immediately handed them over as soon as our people tried to cross the border, and the Chinese executed them right across the border without even any trial or anything. In the face of this, so this is very common. I think the best example we've had in terms of the most friendly one, I would say, is India. India, to date, has not returned any, to our knowledge, has not returned any Uyghur fleeing persecution. Historically, India sought to give us refuge, and foolishly, because of various reasons, our people didn't stay in India. If we had stayed in India, we would probably have a much stronger government in exile, like the Tibetan government in exile. I would think we would probably have been long independent if we had chosen to stay in India and use that as our base of
Yes,
operation.
right.
Um,
So, talking about neighboring countries, China has now created and harbored a very strong relationship with Pakistan for that matter. And Pakistan, be it under Imran Khan or be it under Shehbaz Sharif's government, any and all of these governments have given a bypass to China and have, on occasions, even Imran Khan has given a clean sheet to China, saying that no such ethnical cleansing or no such genocide is taking place inside China and everything is fine in China. How do you react to this, and how does this impact the people who are trying to fight for this cause?
I mean, it's pure hypocrisy at the very least. It's complicity, because these leaders, whether it's Imran Khan or Turkey's Erdogan or some other, Muslim majority country where they claim that they're the champions of Muslims and the defenders of the oppressed and so forth. It's just hypocrisy. They know what's going on. Their intelligence agencies, their people, their governments, they know much more than average people know about the level of atrocities that are happening. In fact, many of these governments are complicit in helping China justify the ongoing genocide as so-called counter-terrorism, or, as I said, by deporting our people. Um, they're in our eyes, they're complicit. And if there's no justice in this world, we believe in the afterlife there is justice, and God will hold them accountable for their crimes as well, because the millions of our people that are being killed, they have their hands are bloody just as equally as the Chinese. And of course, they're selling not just us, but they're selling their own country's future. Because through Belt and Road Initiative, all these different promises, China is encroaching various countries, buying up
Right.
strategic, infrastructure, ports, airports, and engaging in neo-colonialism. The Chinese went back in the 1950s. They came to so-called develop our country, and they said, we will buy, we will help you build hospitals, we will help you build roads. 60 years later, we became a Chinese colony. We became, a heavy Chinese colony. The same thing. China is doing the same thing. They're playing the long game, and these countries, these leaders that are not only complicit in the genocide of East Turkestani people, they're also complicit in the gradual erosion of their own nation's sovereignty and pitting them towards, becoming the next Chinese colony.
So I want to continue with the topic of China and Pakistan's collaboration on certain events or certain concepts for that matter, one of which is CPEC. So China's CPEC investments in Pakistan include surveillance tech that China has also used in Xinjiang. And there's only so much we know about these surveillance systems. And do you think that these surveillance systems, having seen them firsthand, would cause problems for nations that fall under the radar, say India for that matter? And do you think that India should be prepared or look out for any such surveillance systems? And can it cause security concerns?
Absolutely. So many of these surveillance systems are like Hikvision, Huawei, uh, all these different Chinese companies. They've tested it. Like East Turkestan is the testing ground for almost everything that China does, and now they're exporting it into those other countries. So the security cameras, the average Chinese security cameras that they're putting up, this feeds back information to Beijing. Beijing is able to view everything that's going on. Chinese are able to view even the cameras that are being put in government buildings. They're essentially bugging those governments, getting those governments secrets, etc., and creating their strategy based on that. This is not only a risk for the people on the ground, but also for the security of those governments itself. And many of them are seemingly ignoring this because the Chinese offer it for a very cheap price, or they're offering it for quote free. If something is free, there's a problem there. This is what people need to understand. Um, of course, there's already reports. I've read numerous reports that that have been published in Pakistani media over the past several months, in that they need to take the so-called Xinjiang model and apply it to Balochistan, which is an area that is currently occupied by Pakistan, where those people there, like East Turkestan, they're fighting for their national independence and self-determination. So essentially, the Pakistanis are saying maybe we should replicate the so-called Xinjiang model. And we saw what the so-called Xinjiang model is. It is genocide. It is mass sterilization. It's mass internment, mass enslavement. And that's not going to bring stability. In fact, that's going to even worsen the situation to where those people, even the most, the most accommodating ones, are going to have no other choice but to push for the maximalist position, and it's going to have more greater security, so-called security risks for Pakistan than if Pakistan were to just let these people go and let them be free.
Talking about Pakistan's role, we were very pleased as Indians to notice that your government in exile has out and about been supporting the idea that India has all its rights to fight against the terrorist attack in Pahalgam, and that Pakistan should stop supporting any and all of these state-sponsored terrorist attacks, especially cross-border in India and that in Afghanistan. So we were pleased to see that your government stood up and stood with India. I want to understand what is your take on that, and could you elaborate on what are your thoughts on these recent terror attacks in Kashmir?
Well, I mean, they're very cowardly. I mean, like in the rules of conflict under international law, there are two sides. Even if you're engaged in conflict, like I'm not going to debate whether the conflict is justified or not, but there are rules. Even under our own religion, there are rules. You don't attack unarmed people. Um, from our perspective, engaging in attacks, indiscriminate attacks against unarmed people, that's against not just our religion but against international law. If it was them fighting against actual soldiers and security forces, I mean that you could totally justify that under international law, because in a conflict international law allows for that. But the moment that you start engaging in attacks on unarmed people, what they don't realize is not only have they harmed their cause, whatever basis that their cause has, but they've also violated both the tenets of our religion, which they claim to uphold, the tenets of international law, but they've also damaged their own cause that they're claiming to fight for. So this is why we're against any indiscriminate attacks, while international laws, there are rules of laws, rules of war. We try to adhere by that, and we urge others, whether it's states or armed actors who are involved in whatever conflict. There are rules both from a religious perspective and both from a moral, international, legal perspective to follow. And so we urge all sides to follow those rules in their whatever conflict that they're involved in.
Talking about the religious aspect of this, I want to circle back to the Uyghur conundrum that is at hand. Why do you think have OIC members largely avoided condemning the treatment of Uyghurs in Chinese rule? And is this in any way linked to economic dependencies like maybe the BRI?
Absolutely. I mean, it's because of economics. They are selling their religion, they are selling their honor, their dignity. They're selling us, their own co-religionists, because of Chinese investments and other political and economic, cooperation that they have. Unfortunately, unlike China, we don't have tens of billions of dollars to invest in other countries, in Muslim countries, to to ask for their help. Whereas China, it's using the wealth that it's stealing in the hundreds of billions of dollars annually from East Turkestan, using that wealth against us, both to empower China, to develop China, to modernize China, to turn China into a superpower, but also using a significant portion of that to buy off the silence of Muslim and Turkic states, including Pakistan, including international uh, 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 coalitions and bodies like the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Um, the From our view, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation has lost its it has no principles. It's forsaken its own principles. It's forsaken its own mission, because you hear them. If there was a Quran burning in some other part of the world, in the West, in Sweden, for example, or there's these instances where this happened. There's this uproar of condemnation, calling for uh, the very harshest, the most severest types of actions. Whether it's in the issue, even in Palestine, they're all condemned it. But the atrocities that are happening in East Turkestan is not just an atrocities and attack against East Turkestan, but against the whole entirety of the Islamic religion. China has destroyed over 16,000 mosques in East Turkestan, turning many of them into toilets, bars, clubs. They've forcibly forced our women to, uh, they've been cutting their skirts in the street, telling them you can't have anything longer than that passes your knees. Our people are being forced to worship, literally worship the Chinese Communist Party, denouncing God. There's video evidence of the Chinese who took Islamic, texts and placed them on the floors and trampled over them. And all of these countries, they know it, but they pretend to ignore it. And then they hypocritically claim that they're defenders of Islam and that they're defenders of Muslims. They're not defenders of anything. They're defenders of their little money, that the change that the Chinese throws at them.
Mhm.
If anything, they're actively working with those who are the biggest enemies of Islam. This is
Right.
what we have to say on this matter.
Right. So, Saleh, since this also sounds like a very cultural cleansing and not just ethnical cleansing, how has the Uyghur community been preserving its folklore, music, and other elements of ethnic culture? Because cultural appropriation, not appropriation, rather cultural preservation for that matter, is something that a lot of communities that are being cleansed are trying to hold on to. Like the preservation is something that a lot of these communities hold on to. So, how has your community been doing that?
So, I mean, we have a large diaspora community in Central Asia, in other parts of the world like Turkey, and across the world, in the Western world. And the best way we can preserve it is, one, continuing to keep it alive within our own families, within our own communities. Right now, the best way is like digitally, we are able to preserve elements of our identity. For example, historical texts, books that the Chinese government has banished in East Turkestan, outlawed or burned. These are being saved digitally. We're trying to we have community schools in many of our diaspora communities where we teach our language to our children. This is the best way that, given our current capabilities, which is very limited, this is the best way that we can try to preserve our culture. But of course, the destruction of our identity, of our culture in East Turkestan is far worse. I mean, not just our mosques and religious sites, but uh, our historical sites, our cemeteries. Even our cemeteries are being bulldozed. The Chinese are even um, uh, destroying any evidence that we existed in East Turkestan. They built hundreds of crematoriums across East Turkestan, and they're cremating those that have died in the concentration camps, they're in prisons. They're also cremating the remains of our ancestors to ensure that there is nothing left. And this is where the international community, this falls under the category of crimes against humanity. The international community, which repeats never again, which repeats, we that they will never allow genocide to happen. They will never, remain silent to crimes against humanity. They are remaining silent to the biggest genocide and crimes against humanity that humanity has seen since the Holocaust.
So, this brings me to my last question to you, which I think is a question that remains very fundamental to this whole situation. That how long do you think does your government or your diaspora or your people have to fight? How long do you think the fight is going to be before you can call that place home again? Or if I were to maybe reframe this question in a maybe a lighter manner, I would ask that according to you, how long do you think it would take for Indians to be able to travel to maybe Urumqi or Kashgar on a visa issued by an independent East Turkestan government?
Well, it depends on both internal and external factors, especially the external geopolitical situation. Right now, the clock is clicking for us, ticking for us. We don't have a whole lot of time. We maybe have 10, maybe 15 years at max uh, to reverse the situation. If not, we will be a footnote in history. But if East Turkestan is finished, then next stop is going to be Central Asia and South Asia. China is building strategic airports, deploying a lot of troops in East Turkestan, not just to keep us under their occupation, but also to exert pressure and to project power. They've occupied, India's Aksai Chin region. They've annexed it. They're building a lot of military infrastructure along those borders. and they're planning to expand. So an independent East Turkestan is vital to the stability of security and stability of South Asia and Central Asia. So it's necessary for those governments and the broader international community as well to support East Turkestan's independence through all means possible, such as diplomatic, material, and and strategic support. Because if China finishes East Turkestan, we are right now serving as a gatekeeper, as a wall preventing China from expanding further. If we fall, then that wall will have crumbled, and the Chinese will flood other nations just like they are flooding East Turkestan. We remain hopeful that within the coming decade that we will see an independent East Turkestan, because the geopolitical situation is changing, and more countries are awakening to the reality of China, that it is an empire, an evil expansionist empire that must be stopped. And I think governments around the world are slowly recognizing what we have been warning for the past 7 decades.
This issue at hand remains: will China free East Turkestan, or will it unfortunately become a part of mere history and feed into Chinese expansionism ideas? This remains to be seen. We leave here today with more eye-opening facts from the region and a very harrowing first-hand account of atrocities that China has been carrying out in East Turkestan. I am Gunjan Handa, and this is the Asian Chronicle.